Drink, I think, and they're coming in a moment. Of course, we get really planned all of a sudden. Yeah, maybe we just start now then. That's fine.
In my class, you have to sing if you like.
That's a great policy. I love that.
It's really fun.
Do you have people that are alone because they want to sing? Ever?
And no, they don't ever want to sing. They sneak in and everybody looks at them as a singer.
And then they get to sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something.
Yeah, right.
Perfect. How many bars? Yeah. You've never done it. Well, let me be the first to welcome you to the Weissman Foundry. Most of you are already familiar with us. But we are the makerspace that services Babson-Owen and Wellesley colleges, and we host events much like this. Today, I wanted to welcome our panelists. Thank you for being here today, and welcome all of you. But I also wanted to welcome Mike Grananetti, who is our moderator for our event today. Mike is a thought leader in this area. He teaches at Brown and Harvard, and he has been an innovator and an entrepreneur tied to tech and AI for how many years now?
I hate to admit it, buddy, 30 years.
30 years now. So, but I'm going to turn it over to Mike and let him run the show. Good luck, enjoy, and have fun.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for having me and our panelists. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to just start off with about 10 minutes of context, okay? But before you get to know me and you get to know my panelists, I want to ask a little bit about you. I was in a very small room, and it's pretty clear that we have more non-students in this room than students if my powers of visual competency are working. So just who are the students in the room? Who are the students that are at Babson today? And how many of you are in the code club today? Okay, a reasonable number of you, that's cool. Is there anybody in the room that has not yet used ChatGPT? Is there anybody, meaning, do you have a pulse, I guess is the real question I'm asking, okay? All right, so we've used ChatGPT. If you haven't at this point, God help us all, okay? Now, what about those of you who are more creative? Have you used other generative AI image generation tools like DALL-E? So raise your hand if you use the image generation tools. And what's the experience been with that? People pretty impressed with no? So I got a big thumbs down from this guy. Why?
It's just apparently the pieces that are coming together are not like matching perfectly. So
Okay.
a dog might have 3 legs, things like that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
But we're gonna get there, right? And you?
I'm at the opposite of the spectrum. I find it mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you're expecting out
Yeah,
of it.
yeah.
I think it's unbelievable.
Yeah. This dude's, I bet he complains a lot, right? I mean,
Yeah, your Yelp reviews are better than mine.
dude, I mean, come on, right? I mean, it's just magic. It's magic. Wait
Why
another
the
3
science
months
keeps
and trust me.
advancing.
It's one thing, Jonathan, we keep losing the screen, so I don't know why that is. Yeah, please.
I would want to say that I've used DALL-E and also Midjourney, and
Yes.
I think that although they're both two very valuable things, I think that like with Midjourney, you have a lot more control over kind of all of the aspects,
Yeah.
and with keywords and themes and things like that. And
Yeah.
I think both are very valuable, but I think that like Midjourney is definitely like a one step above.
Yeah.
DALL-E 2.
I think Midjourney is super focused on one thing, where OpenAI is building platform technology, and they're playing with. They have a speech recognition, they have a text recognition, they have a coding thing that powers Microsoft Copilot, GitHub Copilot. So I think that's probably why. Yeah, please.
So when he said Midjourney, I have been using Adobe Firefly that they just came out with, and
Yeah.
I think that's like a more like a corporate take on a startup, and
Yeah.
I think Adobe Firefly is doing a great job with that.
Okay. All right, that's great. So a lot. So now, who has done the unimaginable and spends more time using Bing than Google as your search engine? Who has decided that Bing actually having DALL-E and ChatGPT in it? So I got just one hand up. That's it. Nobody else has bought into the Bing renaissance yet, huh? No? I mean, you guys know, right? I mean, you can do ChatGPT and DALL-E right on your phone now. It's pretty cool, right? Okay. Now, anybody using Jasper or some other marketing-oriented copywriting capability today? Because it's turning out some pretty impressive stuff, right? You guys know. So again, remember, there's ChatGPT, but although they're the poster child and the lightning rod, there's hundreds and hundreds of these companies today that are building tools on these large language models. And a number of them, including Jasper, are here for people that are doing marketing. And I assume a lot of the students who are building companies would really benefit from something like Jasper. Yeah, this is a problem. Okay. we're having this level of challenge with this. All right. Anybody coding and using GitHub Copilot? Are you using GitHub Copilot? What are your thoughts on that? The before and the after. What was it like to code before and after?
It's so much more taxing, and GitHub Copilot just makes it so much easier.
Okay.
It's much faster as well.
Right. And what kind of stuff are you coding?
Just basic websites.
Okay. But you're still finding it better, huh? Okay. Now, anybody planning on starting an AI company? Okay. And what domain would you want to start it in?
NDA. No, kidding.
This is not Silicon Valley, okay? We don't have to have an NDA to have a cup of coffee, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Not sure yet. I'm still. It's like first week of me waking up and like thinking, oh my god, I need to do it.
Okay, cool. And I see others, please, yeah?
I'm working on chronic healthcare management.
Okay. And any specific, because healthcare is a big, broad suitcase term, so
Chronic healthcare.
chronic healthcare, okay.
Starting with diabetes, basically.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, please.
I think they're like offering some sort of like consulting AI agency where
Yeah.
you know, a lot of these other older companies that are kind of unfamiliar with like the newest and latest tech and kind of going in and providing them value with
Okay.
increasing workflow. and
I
things
am
like
sure there will be a huge opportunity to educate people. Tommy, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
All right. And anybody interning today at an AI company? Anyone in the audience that's actually has exposure to an AI company today just by interning? No? Okay. All right. So we're gonna spend some time on a panel, but I want to set the stage. I want to provide some historical context because we are living on the cusp of something extraordinary. Now, I've worked in Silicon Valley. I've done a lot of different stuff. I think Dan would agree with me. There's something very powerful that is about to happen, right? And for the students in the room, this may be the most significant event so far, right, from a technology revolution that you have experienced today. Older people like me, we've seen a bunch of these, okay? And one of the things, of course, is the screen, right? That's a real technology. So it's a hell of a screen. So while I wonder what's going on.
Maybe it's like the thing's overheating.
All right, okay, that's cool.
Sorry
All
about
right. So anyway, background, engineer, Silicon Valley, McKinsey after B schools, helped start 8 VC-backed tech companies, took 2 public on the NASDAQ. One was acquired by Oracle, one by IBM, one by Symantec, one by Iron Mountain. So I've been doing this a while. And I started teaching at MIT in 1999, and I'm not running startups anymore, so I teach at Harvard, I teach at Brown, I teach in the program at Berkeley, the engineering leadership program there. And I work with a lot of iconic tech companies doing innovation consulting. Okay, that's kind of what I've been up to. Now, since the beginning of time, mankind has been looking to improve its condition. And depending on what numbers you believe, and if the screen comes back, fire was invented a couple of 100,000 years ago. Okay, and of course now I'm completely out of sync with the way this thing. And if we fast forward 500,000 years, we see one of the first major innovations that really changed the trajectory of world history, the Gutenberg printing press, which was created in 1440 in Germany. And it democratized the spread of information from the elites and the church to pretty much anybody. And then we fast forward another 300 years and we see the invention of the steam engine in England in the early 1700s, which was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And some of the use cases would include something like the steam-powered locomotive. So you no longer had to go across the United States in a horse and buggy. You can only imagine what that took out of somebody, okay? And so we fast forward again to this guy, Tommy Edison, right? The man who has more patents to his name than anyone other than a local Boston MIT professor named Robert Langer. Okay, if you don't know Robert Langer in the Langer Lab, he has surpassed Thomas Edison. He was the founder of Moderna and literally 40 other biotech companies. Okay, but Edison, of course, is popularly considered to be the, if not the founder of electricity, because Nikola Tesla was really the guy that created the kind of electricity that we use today. But he commercialized the commercial light bulb. And it's hard to imagine that people lived without electricity up until about 120 years ago, okay? And so then this is huge. The invention of the transistor at Bell Labs, which quickly became part of Fairchild Semiconductor, which was the father of Silicon Valley. 400 companies spun out of Fairchild Semiconductor and really began what Silicon Valley is today. And if the slides cooperate, you're going to see in 1971 the beginning of the digital age, which was Intel was founded by Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore. And if you don't pay attention, Gordon Moore just passed away a week ago. It's hard to imagine anybody has not heard of Moore's Law. It all started with the Intel 4004 microprocessor. And in 1965, Gordon Moore basically said, you know what? I can see the computing power doubling and the price falling in half every 18 months. And he was a visionary that could actually see microprocessors inside everyday devices like refrigerators and watches and calculators and cars. So this is the beginning of the digital age, which is where you guys at Babson, the students, come on board, okay? Because everything you own has some kind of chip in it, okay? And then finally, I know it's hard to believe there was an era before the internet, okay? I know you can't imagine that, but I can prove to you it's true, okay? And the great Mark Andreessen, who is probably the most respected investor in Silicon Valley these days, was the co-founder of Netscape. They launched the Mosaic browser, and it opened up the democratization of the World Wide Web. But the guy that probably has more influence on all of our lives than anybody was this guy named Steve Jobs, who in 2007 created the iPhone. 2.25 billion iPhones have been sold. Just think about that for a second, right? 1/4 of the Earth's population, if you just do the ratio. It is by far the most profound inflection point in sort of commercial history. And it's the digital lifestyle that we all live today, for better or worse, okay? So if you're a science fiction fan, you may have heard of Arthur Clarke, but I love this quote: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now, you may not appreciate the magic yet, okay? You might be a cynic, but let's be clear. What I just shared with you, all of these inventions are magic, right? They change the trajectory of world history, okay? And then let's talk now about today's subject. And in a minute, we're going to bring my panelists up. We're going to talk now about artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence is not a new concept, okay? I will admit that in the mid-1980s, I was working in Silicon Valley. And every major computing company in Silicon Valley and Boston had staffed AI projects with lots and lots of people. But AI was all dressed up with no place to go, okay? The enabling technologies were simply not ready. We did not have the computing power. We did not have the broadband. And so we had generation after generation of promise without realization, okay? And if you're into theater, I compare this to the waiting for Godot period of AI, okay, by the great poet Samuel Beckett, okay? And we have been waiting for Godot for a long time. And yet, we've seen some glimpses of popular imagination. I'm not talking about dystopian visions like Space Odyssey 2001, where the robots take over humanity. I'm talking about fun stuff like IBM creating their Deep Blue supercomputer to compete on Jeopardy, or DeepMind, before they actually were acquired by Google in 2014, creating an algorithm that could actually compete with this insanely complex Asian strategy game called Go. Go has 10 to the 260th permutations, okay? That's the number one followed by 360 zeros. Try to wrap your mind around that. And they were able to program this algorithm to beat Go, the world's best champions at Go. We've also lived with Siri and Alexa, and they have really not in any way delivered their full potential. I think Apple and Google would both admit that these have been failures. Very, very different use cases than they expected. And Microsoft Tay, for those of you who know Tay, it was quite a train wreck. This was a chatbot that kind of started hallucinating and it went rogue and started pledging allegiance to Adolf Hitler, which is always a good time to shut a chatbot down, okay? And that's exactly what they did, okay? And so as I do this dance with my screen, let me ask my panelists if they would be kind enough to take a seat up front, okay? And awesome. Thank you. There we go. All right. So I'm going to start, Dan, with you. Dan began his career in the mid-90s working for J.P. Morgan and started working on machine learning in 1997, which was pretty early, right? So you, like me, have been waiting for Godot for a very long time, right? And so what has it been like over the 25 years since you started your career as a guy working on AI and investing in AI? What are some of the big takeaways that you would share with the group?
It just keeps getting more powerful. So when I started, it wasn't the beginning. We were sitting on the shoulders of giants. There were 50 years of great academic research, and a lot of what's being implemented today is just implementations of old tech that now has dramatically better training data, dramatically deeper neural networks, dramatically more compute. So over time, the value proposition continues to grow and the expectations continue to grow. But when I was building neural nets in the late 90s, the expectations were very low. And we could take a fully connected neural net that was 3 layers deep, not very deep by today's standards, and beat the market and use that in financial markets to build models that would adjust and adapt to nonlinear relationships.
Okay.
And
meaning giving your bank competitive advantage in trading and the like. Is that what you're referring to? Or?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Finding opportunities where things were mispriced.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
And so over time, the technology continues to improve. The domains that can be covered by AI continue to expand. And then in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, that trajectory has really taken off even more steeply, which I didn't think was possible. It was already moving incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
But the aggregation of training data and the depth of these neural networks and the amount of compute you can throw at them, the price of compute has dropped precipitously. So it really has become very powerful. And I think there are now reasonable applications in just about every domain.
Right.
And if you are passionate about any particular thing, you can imagine a world where you can apply AI and fix it a little bit, or maybe a lot.
Yeah.
So
okay. Cool.
I think we're in a renaissance.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And again, I mentioned this to Jason again. I never bought into crypto, right? I never bought into the metaverse, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that you just don't see the practical application. We've already begun to see many practical applications, and certainly for coding is just one example. So Ruth, how about you? You have a pretty long trajectory of consumer goods and then the tech industry. As you look back over your career, and as, starting with Cullinan, right? And I may be one of the few people in the room to recognize that name, right? Yeah. What strikes you as sort of where we are today compared to where we started with this?
Just how quickly we have crossed the chasm, right? So those of you familiar with the tech lifestyle, adoption life cycle, you start with the innovators, and then you move to the early adopters.
Yeah.
But to get to the next third out of the 5 phases, the early majority, takes years. I mean, it took Gmail about 5 years.
Right.
ChatGPT was released in November with very little fanfare.
Right.
Everyone's using it.
Yeah.
We've crossed that chasm very quickly. 100 million users.
Yeah, literally in weeks.
In weeks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I teach a multi-section course at Babson, and I was at a meeting of all the faculty that teach it, and someone said at the very end of the meeting, they said, well, oh, by the way, we want you to put this in your syllabus. We forbid the use of ChatGPT. Yeah. And I'm thinking, the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah.
We can't. And then I go in the next day to class, and the student's like, oh, professor, guess what? I used ChatGPT last night to generate some content for our website.
Right.
And I'm thinking, that's what Bain is doing. So you mentioned consulting, right? So Bain has an alliance with OpenAI.
Yeah.
Where they are Bain, the consulting group.
Bain and Co.
Yeah, BAI and Bain, right? Yeah, strategy.
And they're using OpenAI to create marketing campaigns for their customers. Coke being one of their customers.
Yeah. Right. And so, to your point, I'm going to now maybe pivot to Jay. right? So as you said, the genie's out of the bottle. It's great that your students are coming to you and acknowledging, because some students are trying to pretend that, no, I did this all on my own, which is a different discussion.
Yeah.
But Jay, from your point of view, as Babson begins to formulate policies around the appropriate usage of ChatGPT, how do you think about this as an instructional technologist and instructional designer?
When I first started looking into it, it really is, it's a tool that you can leverage, much like any other tools technologically through the years. You think about the word processor versus the typewriter. Think about a graphing calculator with mathematics before you had that. And when all those came out, it was like the end of the world for a brief time. Everybody was like, no, you can't use these. This is so different. You have to do all your math by hand. You can't use a graphing calculator. Now it's TI-83 Plus is standard in every higher level mathematics course. It's just learning how to use it. And it's one of those things where you can be, very few people are a complete master to use it in such a degree that it's going to be a problem. The majority of the people are going to be able to use it to improve their work. And so that's kind of the approach we're having, and we're seeing around campus from a lot of different faculty, is we'd like to embrace it a little more. We like we were saying, the genie is out of the bottle. It's you're not going to be able to stop them from using it. We might as well work on how to encourage them to use it in the right manner and kind of guide their usage of it rather than try and forbid it and pretend that it's not there.
So both Ruth and Jay, what are the most creative uses of ChatGPT or the other chatbots that you have seen students use so far? And before we really start to guide them, the kind of stuff they're coming up with on their own. Anything that really jumps out at you as uniquely creative or significant?
Yeah, well, if you go through the entrepreneurship process, so you start with the idea generation. So you could go and say, I'm interested in doing something with basketball, product or service, give me some ideas. And then you move to prototyping. So now I've had students go on DALL-E to create their prototype. And then they have to do market research. So they go and they give me 10 market research questions for this product. Sales script. And you need to get out, once they're executing, you need to get out and sell. And so I had a group use ChatGPT to generate their sales script.
Yes, that's
so
right.
they just kind of went through the entrepreneurship process and all the different steps. They had this digital assistant working with them.
And so a number of the tools that you're going to see in the hands-on time after the panel, we've seen students try using them. Things like creating new slides, and I'll tell you that it's not that great. It's okay, but some of the tools are better than others. But they're using them to get them a place to start from when they're not sure where to start from scratch. They use it as like a blank template, and then you have to engage with it, and it's not going to be perfect right out the bat. You have to know the right prompts to ask. You have to know exactly what you want it to try and give you, because it's only going to give you so much. You could have it write you a wonderful essay, but it's not there's no citations in it. I mean, and that could be coming down the line. But currently, there's no citations, so you have just opinion pieces that could be wrong. Because the information is not infallible in the software right now. So it's a good place to start from. It's getting better.
Getting way better.
It's definitely getting way better. So not quite there, but it is going to be, one of those things down the line that we have to address a little more. But for the time being, it's not infallible, right? It's not going to have everything 100% correct. And it doesn't have supporting documentation for anything. So at a higher level, when you're doing an essay, I can give you ideas, but then you have to actually find ways to support the ideas that it's generating for you.
So Muya, you have an amazing background, right? So I just got to know Muya before we started the panel. So you're going to get a degree from Olin, but 2 concentrations from Babson, and you head the AI club here on campus, right? And you want to go on for an advanced degree in data science or something in that field, right? So as you sit here today, right, you think about your future, and you see all of these opportunities that are presenting themselves. What do you think is the most striking thing for you as you prepare for your career? What is it that excites you the most right now?
Well, personally, what I've been experiencing on campus so far, what I've been doing in the AI club a lot is to help people to implement AI to their business. Because I'm also taking classes at Olin, so I also kind of help them to think about how to implement their tech into business. So it's like a double, so it goes both ways. So I guess it's my passion about this is that it's kind of related to AI consulting, I guess, because it's kind of to bridge the gap between like business and technology, and I think it's very important because nowadays a lot of people are experts in one of those fields, but they don't have a lot of knowledge of how to connect them in the first place. So that's one part that really excites me.
Okay, and these businesses you're working with, are they student-led businesses on campus or more, professional businesses outside of that?
It's more of a student stuff.
Student stuff, okay.
Yeah, it's more of like they have some startup ideas, and then they sort of ask me about what kind of machine learning techniques or like AI applications I can do for my business, and I sort of advise them in terms of
Okay, but longer term, right? As you think about what you, at least at this point, right? You obviously are still a junior and getting ready to finish up your junior year. Where do you see your career heading? Do you see yourself, getting involved in a startup and helping build applications, or do you see yourself, working in some research capacity? How do you apply some of this knowledge?
In the short term, I see myself to work in like more of a research opportunity. But I guess in the long term, one thing that I'm very concerned about is policies and regulations around AI. And then I realize a lot of policymakers nowadays, they don't have a technical background.
Right.
And a lot of the researchers nowadays, they are very expert in their own field, but they don't have, they sort of lack the ability to apply them in the real world setting.
Right.
So those are limitations I've seen, and I hope that my background in terms of both BAFS and NOLA can help me to
bridge that gap.
Exactly.
Wow. And I love that, right? So there was a podcast on a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times podcast, about a U.S. congressman who's actually getting a degree in artificial intelligence because he knows he doesn't understand enough about the technology to write legislation, which is pretty, and this guy is 72 years old. So he's not a kid, right? Which is just an amazing thing to hear. But obviously that's a rarity, right? So I think, we need people like you who can be translators, right? Who can speak in plain English.
Hopefully.
Right, and really help people see this. That's great. So we're going to go back to the policy, right? The one thing I want to finish on is this big open letter that came out on the 29th of March that now has 10,000 signatures that say, hit the brakes. But I know the genie's out of the bottle, so it's going to be probably impossible, but I want to close on that. So let me go back to you, Dan. So as someone who obviously is investing now in tech and in generative AI companies, right? Just yesterday or 2 days ago, we had demo day at Y Combinator, right? 57 out of 200 companies are generative AI, right? So obviously a feeding frenzy right now. And it appears to be the only place where anybody can raise money these days. So to the students in the room, if they were building an AI company today with all of the crowded competitive landscape that is out there today, what advice would you give them if they were looking to come to you and have you help fund their startup?
Stick close to your customers. There's a lot of different ways to build businesses. Raising money is not necessary for all of those. I would say don't try to build a business that requires a lot of capital these days. If it were 2000, 2001, money's free. Build businesses that require capital, fine. But today, capital is expensive, and all the time, you should stick close to what your customers need, really understand them, try to build exactly for them, have some vision about how you can apply that solution more broadly. But if you can build a solution that's helpful for one company in an abstract way that applies to many, then the nature of software is its scalability. And so you build it, you solve that problem for one, and then you try to abstract it for more than one. I would say don't worry about the financing backdrop. That is a distraction. Spend your time building and delivering and making your customers happy. And that traction that you build up with your customers is what the investors want to see anyway. So it's actually better regardless of the backdrop. Even if this is an environment where capital is available from financing, you still want to build up your traction with companies. I would say that's the way to start.
Just to continue, so one of the things you and I talked about before when we hooked up quickly on the phone to get prepped up, you talked about that you wanted to provide advice to students because today more than ever, right, the ability to build an AI company without having to be a PhD in data science or a world-class expert is really unprecedented, and that students should not be intimidated. So can you elaborate a little bit on that thought?
Yeah, it used to be that if you wanted to build a company using AI, you really had to understand the AI pretty deeply, and you had to build it from scratch. Maybe you ran your own server, you were writing your own code, maybe starting in 2004 or 12 or whatever. You can find a framework that allows you to build on top of that framework, and you build up your components and you wrap it in a user interface, and now you've got your product. But today, more and more of those components are available through APIs or from GitHub as open source, and you can sort of assemble things like Legos. And so you don't really need as much technical domain expertise. What you really need is a clear understanding of what to build. It's I don't remember who said it, but it was something along the lines of, today we can build anything we want, and it's no longer a question of what can we build, but what should we build.
Yeah.
And I think that's really true. If you have a vision that connects you to demand, then start to think about how to implement that. A small team of 2 to 5 people can now do what used to take 30 people. And 10 years before that, it was 100.
Yeah, and that's powerful, right? So the message is you don't have to be, a team of MIT engineers to do this. Of course, it would benefit to have someone from MIT on the team, but it democratizes the ability.
Not necessarily.
Yeah,
you can build these things. You sit on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the case that you really have to invent any core technologies. You can piece together core technologies that other people have already invented, and the complexity of the number of things you can build now is essentially infinite, and the tools are in place. It's like when you have 5 pieces of Legos, you can build 10,000 different things. That's what it's like now. You can build a million different inventions, a million different companies based on things that are already out there.
Cool.
It's a matter of implementation and execution.
Great, thank you. So Ruth, I want to turn back to you. So, there's this phrase that you never want to be an enemy of the future, right? And so there are certain companies like JP Morgan and Verizon and Northrop Grumman that's saying, we will not allow ChatGPT inside the 4 walls of our company, okay? And yet, we all know that you can do some amazingly powerful things to augment human capability and intelligence with ChatGPT. Salesforce.com just announced a $250 million venture capital fund, right? Microsoft is infusing all of its 365 with ChatGPT and DALL-E. GitHub has incorporated OpenAI's Codex into GitHub Copilot. So clearly there's a tremendous amount of new capabilities that are being integrated into enterprise apps and productivity apps. So if you were to advise companies that you consult to or that you have worked with in the past, right, how should they be thinking about deciding on how to incorporate OpenAI and other generative AI tools into their business workflows?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would tell them to do is go onto the OpenAI site and read their mission statement, because they are very concerned about individuals coming onto the site and performing any sort of nefarious acts.
Right.
Very concerned about that, and they're very and then also read their content policy, everything that they prohibit on the site. So they thought this through very, very carefully. I mean, last week, right, Italy banned the use of GPT. And Sam Altman, the CEO, former CEO of Y Combinator, is going out to Italy this week to talk to them about it, to have a conversation about it. And I think that's just what we need to just have these conversations. Because in Europe, right, privacy is very, very important. Personal information is protected pretty tightly over there. And so I noticed today OpenAI updated their privacy policy, and it says anyone living in Europe, UK, will be able to get access to any of their personal information. So I would just encourage everyone to go on the OpenAI site, find out that these people are their mission is to do no evil, essentially, and to do good, actually, to do. They want this to be used for really social, helping to solve some social problems. Very interested in that use.
So to that point, right, so there's no doubt when OpenAI was formed, right, it was formed in 2015 as a nonprofit, by key members of the PayPal mafia. So the founding group was Reid Hoffman, who's also the founder of LinkedIn, and now a Greylock investor of Silicon Valley. This guy named Elon Musk, you may have heard of, right? Guy named Peter Thiel, Sam Altman, and Jessica Livingston from Y Combinator, and a cast of greats, right? But what happened in 2019 was they understood, right, going back to the point that Dan had said, right, these large language models have become so massive that they are now using 1 trillion parameters, okay, 1 trillion parameters to, to train their models. And so Altman figured out that there was just no way they could raise enough capital as a nonprofit to build these models, train these models, and have the compute power to run the queries. And so there was a parting of the ways, and Elon Musk took his football and went home. Okay, he was not happy with this decision. And of course, this led to the $13 billion investment in OpenAI that we have seen over the last year. And a lot of that is just to pay for the infrastructure to continue to train models and run queries, right? Because the amount of energy usage is insane. So the thing that is challenging, and I guess we'll wrap up on this point, right? So we saw this very, very important letter, open letter that came out. It's been signed 10,000 times now over the last week or so. And the thing that I think scares people the most is even the people that created OpenAI and ChatGPT don't really know how it works, right? That the neural network effect and the size of the models is allowing for a level of regeneration that even the experts don't understand. And I think that's really ultimately why this letter came out, is no one really feels like they can control what is happening. So as you said earlier, right, you would love to get involved in maybe policy and help. What was your reaction to this letter? Did you feel that it was something that we needed to, take a deep breath and take a pause? Was that something that, you would agree with? Did you think it was just, sort of impossible to even think about that? How did you internalize what you read?
It's kind of very complicated to.
Yeah. It's a complex issue. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually to think about like what actions would be right under the situation.
Yeah.
So I can't give a very certain answer, but I would say that it's very hard to go back once like the Pandora box is open.
Yeah.
That's a right expression.
Yeah.
So I guess instead of like thinking about like how should we go back to like a former state, we should think about how we want like the future to be with this interpretation. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
And they is a big they, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And here's the challenge, of course, right? When we had the Manhattan Project and we created nuclear power, it was all done by the government, and there were massive safeguards that were created around it, right? When we understood how to splice DNA in 1975, and there was a lot of concern about the downside, biohazard effects, there was a massive global conference, and they put in place standards to prevent things like what happened coming out of the Wuhan lab from happening, right? This was the first time we really saw a biohazard coming out of a lab. And so that means for 50 years they did pretty well. And the question now is, right now, it's not the government that's in charge. It's private companies who have a profit motive. And it's going to be pretty hard to, do the goat rodeo that one needs to do to bring these companies to any level of collaboration, right? So to your point, Ruth, I think, as you said, it's always good to have dialogue. And if nothing else, I think maybe this letter has engendered some level of dialogue. But it remains to be seen who's going to really carry this through.
I do think we need guardrails too.
Yeah.
Who's on this platform? And if they're using it irresponsibly, there needs to be some sort of consequence.
Yeah.
And guardrails with respect to the content that's being used to train the algorithms.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dan, what about you? What are your thoughts on this letter? Were you surprised when the letter appeared, or not? Did it?
I wasn't surprised, but I think it's foolish.
Yeah.
My own take is that I imagine a couple different potential scenarios for the world. There's a scenario where AI takeoff happens soon,
Yeah.
or AI takeoff happens later.
Right.
And I think the least worrisome version of that is it happens as soon as possible.
Right.
And we're still at the point where it's easy to shut down the farms. It's
Yeah.
you can slow down the growth. You can turn these systems off. The level of integration across the environment is not that pervasive. It's reasonable, but I think what's likely to play out is there's going to be an ecosystem of AIs, not just like one only, and that the security AIs will do a pretty good job of locking down the vulnerabilities relatively soon. So maybe in the next 2 years, the companies that implement security-oriented AIs will close down all the back doors. They will figure out how to lock down their systems, and then that will be, relatively good move. There will be a large volume of AIs that are trying to sell you something, and they will have access to all kinds of information about you, and they will be pitching you products and filling your mailbox and covering your internet, and that's going to get super annoying, and it's going to be hard to tell the difference between real content and propaganda. It's going to be hard to tell the difference between real human communicating with you and a pretend one. And then on the other side, I think, people are going to also have their own AI agents that represent them, and over time those AIs will clash, and you can sort of think of it as a buyer's AI and a seller's AI.
Right.
And rather than us being vulnerable to all those seller AIs just bombarding us with content, it'll likely be instead the seller AIs bombarding our buyer AI with content, and we can control the buyer AIs to protect us from that cacophony.
Okay.
And
Kind of like my LinkedIn in-mail box today.
I would guess probably the opposite of that.
Okay.
It'll probably not be like that.
Okay, thank God. Okay.
Just describe the social dilemma.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
So I think there's going to be a large population of AIs. Some of them will be good, some of them will be bad. OpenAI, I think, is actually an excellent example of an ethical company that's building guardrails around their AI, but there are already plenty of open source versions that are right behind it. And Llama is a good one. There's one called Alpaca, and you can train these things on your own on your own GPU. You can do it on a laptop in 6 hours and run it with a very fast, low latency API, local API, and so those have essentially no guardrails.
Right.
And it will be easy for a bad actor to build bad AIs. And so it's going to be a battle between good AIs and bad AIs. I'm hoping that the companies like OpenAI that are ethical and build in guardrails into the system prompt, guardrails into the architecture, they will stay ahead, and that the good AIs will, in the end, dominate over the bad AIs. But like humans, it's going to be full of actors. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, and we just have to make sure that we are investing in the good ones, the ones that are ethical, so that we can lock down security, protect national infrastructure, protect humanity, and so I'm hopeful. I don't think we should slow down at all, especially inside companies that are ethically oriented, because the bad actors, they won't slow down.
So I want to wrap this up, right? I want to move us into the hands-on, but I want to just ask each of you if you had just one piece of advice, right? I mean, I think we really are standing at a very unique point in history. And I know it's very easy to say that, but I don't think it's hyperbolic in this case. I think that some of the greatest minds in the world recognize just sort of how pivotal this moment is. So what advice, starting with you, Jay, would, as someone who's, for the students, of course, right? What advice would you give them in terms of, how they should think about engaging with generative AI, in the classroom, in their studies, in their Babson experience?
Stuff because we're working on policies for campus-wide, but personally, if I'm looking at how you can engage with it, you should understand how these things work. I'm not saying you should use it to replace your work and be dishonest. You should be doing your work, and you can use this as a tool to aid in that. It's in all the different ones that are coming out are insane on what they can do, and don't be afraid of trying them out and figuring out, can this help me to improve something. One way that I've seen that can help you is you can use it as a tool is if you're writing code, thousands of lines of code, it breaks and you can't figure out why. You could ask an OpenAI, can you analyze this for me faster than I can look through all these thousands of lines of code and tell me what's wrong, and it goes out. You just have an open bracket here. Can you close it? And save you hours and hours and hours of amazing work. You use it that way. Use it to help you with things that you're already doing, but don't try to abuse it. It's really something that can be a great tool if you're using it for in the right ways and the right purpose.
This is for both the faculty and the students. So students need multiple examples of certain things to really grasp it. And it's hard for faculty to come up with multiple examples. It's time consuming, it's a little bit tedious. So go on and ask the system to, for example, the other day I asked it, give me several examples of database design, questions and the solution. So that saved me a lot of time, but also the students, when I gave it to them, they're like, oh, thank God, because I'm really not getting this. And then students also need multiple explanations of multiple definitions of certain concepts. The other day I was defining what a miner does in a blockchain class, and I'm looking out and I can tell that, at least half the class is like, what? And so again, go on and ask for multiple definitions.
Right, okay. Just to get context, and maybe one of them will strike the chord.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great. I think for your point of view, right, I think we already talked about, the starting of companies, so I think we've covered that, but is there anything else that you want to, impart?
GPT-4 is really helpful in answering questions. And a lot of the questions that we're talking about here, you can actually ask GPT-4 and it will give you really good answers in many cases. So if you're thinking about starting a business, you can tell GPT-4, I'm thinking about starting a business. I want to solve diabetes or chronic pain. I want to solve this. I want to apply the following tools. I want to approach this market. How should I begin? And it will give you a relatively thoughtful solution. And that is a great starting point. It might not be the final answer, but it's a great starting point. And after you've made some progress, you can tell it, I've made this progress, what should I do next? And it will, shockingly, give you a pretty good answer. So I would lean on that and try it out, get familiar with it, and sit on the shoulder of giants.
Cool. And Muya, you are leaning into AI in a way few students at Babson or Olin are, as head of the AI club and the 3 different concentrations you're going to graduate with. So how can you demystify or make AI seem less threatening or less daunting to some of your fellow students? What would you tell them?
That's actually what I'm trying to do with all of my AI club sessions.
Okay.
I have some members down here, but that's basically what we've been doing. I can't summarize all of that into one couple sentences, obviously, but basically I like to say my approach to that. So there's a lot of machine learning techniques, like neural networks, convolutional neural networks, recurrent neural networks, and then SVM, a bunch of them, countless of them. So basically what I did was to teach how those structures work. So that's a way of demystifying them. So instead of seeing them as magic or black boxes. But at the end of the day, I would say it's very hard to demystify them because the AI model itself does not have a very good interpretability, especially with deep neural networks, according to my understanding. There's a lot of whether it be random or automated components to it. So I guess I'm also trying to learn more about that to make it more explainable, I guess.
Okay, cool.
Overall.
All right, well, I want to just leave you with the final thought. I want to first of all thank our panelists. I really appreciate you. So here in Boston, there's a guy by the name of Alvin Toffler. Does anybody know the name Alvin Toffler? Alvin Toffler is a futurist, right? And one of my very favorite quotes of his is that the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write. The illiterate of the 21st century are those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Okay? And so I have been in the advanced tech industry for my entire career. And, and I'm at a point where, I've seen a lot of inflection points. And it's a remarkable thing if you are paying attention, right? And I guess my message to you is, it used to be, when I started my first tech company in Boston in 1991, we were a esoteric group of geeks, okay? There were not a lot of people doing advanced tech in the startup world in Boston, right? And companies were not all tech companies. There was a very small number of us that thought of ourselves as tech companies, right? Every company today is profoundly influenced by the advances in technology. And if you are serious as an entrepreneur, as so many of you Babson students are, or whatever it is that you choose to do, you really now need to add this new dimension to your toolkit. You need to stay aware, right? And literally since last October, just in the last 5 months, we've seen Stable Diffusion get dropped. We've seen Midjourney get dropped. We've seen multiple versions of ChatGPT come out. We saw DALL-E come out. I mean, it is accelerating to the point where it's almost impossible to keep up. And yet, you have to keep up. Because if you don't, you will become irrelevant. And so somebody on your team needs to be that person that is the sponge, that is so enthusiastic about what's happening and is really your antenna into the world and can keep you very well aware. Because if you miss a beat now, it could be very, very challenging to recover as a startup company. Okay, it's just getting faster, and it's impossible to imagine that it can get any faster, but I assure you it will. So anyway, this is a fascinating subject. It was a pleasure to have a chance to interact with the panel and with our guests, and look forward to now the experiential session. Thank you, Jonathan, for
We definitely need to get a license for that. I just want to invite you to grab a cup of coffee, a snack, and then head out into the workroom and just play with AI. For those of you that were too afraid earlier to admit you haven't used ChatGPT yet, please do so. We have it out there. We've also have a variety of other esoteric AIs out there that might be helpful to experience and just see where the land lies right now. But enjoy. We'll have everything set up for the next hour and a half or so, but have fun. Thank you.